Cervantes in New York is delighted to host this presentation of the English translation of the book entitled The Barcelona Incident by Dr. Fernando Aleu. The novel narrates a most interesting and unknown episode that took place in Spain during the Second World War. It occurred in 1943 at the port of the city of Barcelona, where there was an exchange of British and German prisoners between two opposing sides of the war. The exchange involved thousands of wounded prisoners from Great Britain and Germany, with crucial support and mediation from Switzerland. It is a pleasure to participate in this event in partnership with the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute. The Queen Sofia Spanish Institute has carried forth a long-standing commitment to sharing and promoting the culture and heritage of the Spanish-speaking world. This activity in particular highlights two fundamental pillars of its cultural mission: literature and history. The Institute is also committed to building bridges through culture, and along with the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute's annual Translation Prize, this event highlights a recently translated book from Spanish into English by Roca Editorial that exemplifies the importance of sharing culture narratives via translation. Dr. Fernando Aleu and Dr. Luis Rojas Marcos will guide us through this exciting historical episode and uncover the intricacies of this great novel during this exclusive conversation.
Let me express my appreciation to the director of the Cervantes Institute in New York City. A pleasure to be here with you today, and also it is a real honor to be part of my good friend and colleague Fernando Aleu and his wonderful and very moving and scary too book and story about that time, very difficult time in the world of World War II, when the real moment had to do with the exchange in prisoners, which happened in Barcelona. Actually, when Dr. Aleu was there. Mm-hmm. So maybe, if it's okay with you, we can start by you telling us a little bit the time and how come you were there and your experience from that time.
With pleasure. Also, thank you to the Instituto Cervantes for the welcome, which is deeply appreciated. Dr. Luis Rojas Marcos is a friend, and he asks what you heard, what was the time like? You cannot think because you were not born, but was October 1947. I was 14 years old, and I was a swimmer. My club in Barcelona is in the harbor, and the team was training there every evening. One evening, we go there for our swimming routine, and the police tells us, "Boys, you cannot go." Why? Because the harbor is closed. How can the Barcelona harbor be closed? Mm. And he said, because tomorrow, a very significant event is taking place here, and Spain's honor is in play, and we don't want anything to go bad, so you stay out of it. And we couldn't go. That was too much for us to accept. So the next day we decided not to go to class. We had chemistry. I usually flunk chemistry. And we went to the mountain of Montjuic, which overlooks the harbor. What is going to happen that calls for so much secrecy? We looked at the harbor and nothing was there. And we said, well, the Guardia Civil has pulled our legs. But suddenly, Pepe Gancedo, you might remember him, he said, no, look what's happening. There are 4 huge ships coming very slowly to the harbor. Carlos Muñoz, who was also one of the frustrated swimmers, said, but look what's happening at the pier. And what was happening was a great number of black limousines, which in those days were a rarity in Spain. And some of them had the swastika flying, and the others had the Union Jack flying. And we said, well, this is getting interesting. The ships sailed in, they docked, and then the show started, which was the exchange of prisoners, wounded prisoners, between the Allies and the Germans. And that's the beginning of the book.
Wow.
It's not the beginning of
Yeah.
the book. It's in the middle of the book. Yeah.
Wow, that must have been very interesting moment, right? To be a witness to such an important event in the history of the world. So that was your real witnessing the event. And at what point the thought of writing about came to your mind?
That's a good question. This happened many years later. I have a granddaughter who's very inquisitive. And she said she was attending Colorado College. She came home for dinner one night and she said, "Grandpa, tell me, what do you remember from the days you were growing up that made a mark in yourself?" And I don't know why I mentioned this. Why did I mention this? Because Spain, in the post-Civil War years, was in serious condition. And the city of Barcelona, like the rest of Spain, was dark, sad, and hungry. And all of a sudden, these 4,000 wounded prisoners brought a great contingent of people from Berlin, because it was the first exchange ever of prisoners, and a great number of people from London. And these people gave to the city for a few days an atmosphere that for us was new. And a relative of my mother was running a big hotel there, the Old Ritz, and he called and he said, "Fernando, I would like you to come to the hotel because you are now growing up, and I want you to look at people that live well," which you don't. And I went there, and certainly it was an impression. Beautiful ladies, most of them smoking, practically all blonde, gorgeous, great long legs. I said, wow, this is the place to be. And I remember that. My granddaughter said, "Why don't you write a story about it?" And I said, "Why not? And the story is in your hands."
Let me ask you, Fernando, is this the first novel that you write?
Yes. When I retired from medicine and a business venture that I had, I found myself with time. I don't like to play golf. I like to play tennis, but I was getting tired. And I like to ski. And I fell and broke my hip.
Oh, wow.
And to break your hip late in life is a complicated thing. And when I went back to the mountain, I realized that my ski days were over, and then decided, Anna is right. I should write something and keep myself entertained. And writing of the book, it entertained me almost 3 years. So it was a good idea to do that.
Yes, yes. And when you say you felt entertained. I can relate to that. This book is powerful, and the emotions, the intrigue, they're very, very powerful and very deep, and which makes me wonder, writing about such a dramatic relationships and situations of life and death, and I wonder how that affected you and your day to day.
You are a physician. You see the triumph of tragedy, happiness, despair, passions, abnegation, degeneration, hate, and love. Everything is in there. It's the humanity. And it doesn't take much of an imagination to discuss these prime reactions of the human being, particularly if you have seen many of them in situations of despair, in a hospital, maybe some facing death. Everything comes to the surface, and all you have to do is to read their faces and to listen. And that's what I tried to do.
It is really very moving and at times scary story. You describe very, very well the motivations of people, the feelings, and how they express their passions at times, to the point of, I don't want to reveal the story, but there's a point where it's suicide. Now, as you go over the very interesting story, do you feel that you identify yourself with any of the characters in the story?
Some of them, not all. The lady protagonist of the story is a woman that had a problem, but she knew that had, among others, that one. And she didn't know the difference between love and passion. She thought that love was to be in bed with a man. When she grew older, realized with a fading passion that that was not love. And that called for a realignment of the way she looked at life. And this coincided with a delicate moment in female biology, that where the first wrinkles appear, the first white hair appears, maybe a couple of varicosities somewhere where they should not be. And she said, the passion I had for this man that kept me going for so many years is no longer there. So where is the love? And that was the beginning of some problems.
So, yeah, I can understand that. So that was Rosie, right? That's the name of the lady.
You did your work.
Rosie is an incredible human being with such an intensity, but at the same time, someone who keeps her brain working well, and she can really manipulate us to some degree. I don't want to tell you the story, but she puts a lot of effort and feelings into saving her friend, Max, and that is an incredible. I have to tell you, when I started reading this part, and her feelings about him and how she managed to help him. Max was part of the exchange, one of the soldiers, and that was very. It was impossible to stop reading the book. I have to tell you. So my guess, because I've not written a novel, my guess is as you write this very intense and very interesting relations and intrigue, you must be also feeling them to some degree. I don't know.
Yes, in part. The job description of Rosie that came from Berlin is you have to do that. And in order to accomplish the objective, corruption is fine. Taking of money is fine. Giving yourself sexually is fine. Killing is fine. So that made that woman very strong because she wanted to do well for Germany. And I understand some of these things. I went to a school, a religious school, and every day a sense of discipline and what to do was ingrained in our brain. And I understood how Rosie, that daily was receiving memorandum and orders from Berlin, little by little, her vision of humanity changed. It was absolutely the most easiest thing for her to do, to pull a pistol and kill a person that she was talking to.
Right.
And I understood how a mind can be manipulated. And the German Nazi apparatus was very successful in manipulating people's mind. And I don't want to extend myself on this question, which is very appropriate, but how can you accept that one of the most civilized nations in the world, the nations that brought us the best music, the best philosophers, the best writers, could be absolutely drunk by the oratory she was, or it, or he was receiving from the politicians, and to watch trains speeding in the middle of the night, loaded by human beings that were taking them to a death camp, and to ignore these things. So the power of not suggestion, manipulation of the mind, and you know more of this about anybody, is significant. And I understood that.
Right. So in a way, writing this very interesting story, you really made you feel a lot of different feelings as you were writing, right? Because these characters are so real for the reader. There's a lot of feelings there.
They are very real. You know, Barcelona in those days was a very interesting city in a way, because many refugees were coming from Germany, Czechoslovakia, Holland, going to Spain because the harbor of Barcelona was the only one that kept a regular service to South America. Ibarra, Cabo de Hornos, Cabo de Buena Esperanza, and these ships, which were very big, 30,000 tons, were departing Spain absolutely loaded to Buenos Aires, to Rio, to the Caribbean. And this passage of people, interesting people, intelligent people, artists, performers, awakened my curiosity. And many afternoons I would go to the harbor just to see the faces of these people going up on the boarding plank, and they didn't have anybody to say goodbye to. They just long faces going. There was a service from Transmediterranea that had an old steamship called the Plus Ultra that was running a kind of a shuttle between Spain and what then was Palestine. Israel did not quite exist. And you know the flotation line of a ship, which is where the green ends and the structure of the ship begins? You wouldn't see it. It was so heavy, loaded with people. So these things mark you. And just not to extend me even more, but I love to talk about this. In the hotel that I visited because of my uncle was directing it, there was a French orchestra called Bernard Hilda. And one afternoon I was there, and my uncle, Don Ramon, said, I cannot see you today because I have to speak to the musicians of the orchestra because they have to change their names. Why do they have to change their names? And if they identify that all the players of your orchestra, their names are Goldberg and Scheinberg and Liechtenstein, there is going to be problems. So they are going to change their names. I could not understand that. Why? I still wonder.
Yeah. I mean, that I'm sure had a big impact on you and the people, even the people who had to change their own names. But you mentioned something interesting before. You mentioned religion playing a role. And there's a character here that was a member, and I think he was a physician. He was a member of the Opus Dei.
True.
At the time. And I wonder what, in the story that you wrote so well, what was the role of the Opus Dei?
This character, who indeed was a member of Opus Dei, and Opus Dei was it was not a religious order. It was not like the Jesuits, for instance. It was created by a priest, and the idea was to get political power. That was the purpose of Opus Dei. An army of people that were going to fight ignorance, accepting that they had all the answers and everybody else didn't. And Oscar Prat, the name of the Opus Dei member, was very condemnatory of Rosie because she had such loose ethical values. And he said, people like this, they deserve what they get. But when he knew her better and better and better, he began to change. And he said, even under the most devil, diabolic, satanic minds, there is a hope for redemption, for doing good. And Rosie, in a moment of emotional downness, she said to herself, everything I stood up for life is wrong. I'm going to judge myself. and I'm going to condemn myself to the punishment that I think fits my sins. And she proceeded to do what the feeling told her what to do. Pratt used the metamorphosis of Rosie as the triumph of good over evil, the triumph of love over hate, and the need that every human being has of being enjoying redemption. Your faults, your sins might be forgiven under some circumstances.
Another point I wanted to bring up, because as part of the story and the details that you give so well, there's the issue of perfume. And I couldn't help but think, because you have had a very clear involvement, and you're an expert in that area, and at least you work in the industry, international industry of perfume. And I wonder, when there were certain moments in the story, very, very moving moments, where perfume play a role. And I wonder what comes to your mind now when you think of the role of perfume.
Perfume is a message carrier. It is an agent that helps association of memories, thoughts, and situations. If when we walked into this auditorium, somebody would have sprayed, I don't know, Chanel, for instance, we would be pleasantly surprised. We would walk out and nothing would happen. If the second day that we come here, the same operation is repeated, we would begin to associate Chanel with this room. And months later, if you are in the movies and a lady goes by and sits next to you in the days when social distancing was not required, and you would smell that fragrance, you say, oh, I remember the Instituto Cervantes. This particular association of fragrance and situations has a physiological substrate, which is, and you know much about this, the limbic system, the emotional circuit of the brain. And in the book, there is a moment when Max has considered to do something very significant against his own beliefs and feelings. And the person that he was about to commit this transgression with had a fragrance on, as a typical association. And the day of the particular event that he would not like to remember, when he wakes up in his bed and turns around, the pillow next to him had that fragrance. And he said, "Ha ¿qué pasó?" And this is not fantasy, it's reality. In fact, there is hope that fragrance might help patients with memory loss, such as some cases of Alzheimer, for instance. an Alzheimer patient, you ask them, what did you do when World War II ended? He remembers everything about it. You ask them, what did you have for breakfast? They do not remember. The memory reason is lost. Memory remote is maintained in most cases. If you associate the recent memory with fragrances, the sequence of evoking, of remembering is facilitated.
Very interesting, really. And you're an expert, you're a neurologist, you know very well how the brain works. So,
I wish.
well, at least for certain things, and the senses are so powerful. And certainly you, in this very interesting story, it's very dramatic when you read about the impact of that particular perfume. Now, another question that it comes up reading this historic, really, novel, there's some sexual obsession and romantic love, right? There are chapters there, or there are situations where what you sense is more of a sexual urge or sexual obsession, and at times that is mixed in by the same people, but in a different situation with romantic love. And I was wondering how you deal with that in the story.
We alluded to this briefly earlier. Max was the ultimate in masculine beauty, was the ultimate in masculine athletic power, was the ultimate in masculine sexual vigor. And this woman said, my God, this is everything I'm looking for. However, this gorgeous man did not have the romantic quality that must be associated in physical passions, just to make them worthwhile and last. Sexual encounters are not very long lasting. If you think they are, you're wrong. There has to be something else. And when this man became the object of desire of another man, he was wondering about himself. Am I really as man, as virile, and as sexually clear as I used to? Or I have some components that perhaps would justify a different behavior. And this doubt begins to mark him a little bit. And there was an experience that indicates why. And after all these war days were over, this man wants to adopt a very acceptable social behavior, gets married and things. Sometimes he also found that perhaps he was not there 100%. And that creates a bit of a conflict and doubts about himself. And you know, a book, you have to create suspense and dwell on these things, and I try to do that. Yeah.
Well, and you do it masterfully. It's a really, it's a very emotional book. very intense story. Another thought that I was wondering, in medicine, and you know this as well as I do, and in my specialty, psychiatry, we deal oftentimes with depression, right? And the worst side effect of depression is when the person loses hope and where life is not worthwhile anymore. And in this book, without revealing, the story, there are situations where someone may lose interest in life, not because they are sad, but it appears that it's by principle. Like, I don't deserve to live anymore. And not because I cry day and night and there's no hope. It's more of an intellectual decision to kill yourself. And I was wondering how you react to that.
The case of depression, which I portrayed here, certainly, in my way of thinking, is justified. There is this woman that had been indoctrinated, as we have just described, into a very rigid political set of views. Germany was the best country. Hitler was the best leader. The issues of misconduct were remedies of a problem. There was no concern about killing people until one day she read a report where the simple fact of killing people was treated as a business problem. Cost of killing 100 people. How much does it cost? Doing what? Shooting 100 people? Guillotining 100 people? Or putting 100 people in an oven or something? And the clinical way these techniques are so coldly described, like if we were talking about selling corn against wheat, for instance, and the cost effectiveness of an approach suddenly hits that woman in the good part that she still kept in her heart. And she said, how can I be so stupid as to ignore these cruel manipulations in the treatment of human beings? And that's a call that she has to answer. And she had difficulty answering this call, and that started an inward process of guilt and closing herself to the world, which are causes of depression, as you know well. And the process continued to its end.
Yeah. Let me bring up another question that crossed my mind. If you were, and I don't know if you have read the book, after you finish the book, and if you were to read the book now, your book, how do you think you will react to it?
You're really bad. There are parts I don't like. There are parts that I thought I wrote a lot and said nothing or little. On the other hand, most of the book is sparse in language. I don't go for long descriptions. I go for long dialogues. Because through a dialogue you know a person. And who wants a description of a chair or of a tree or of a flower? But a description of human being lends itself to all kinds of approaches. And what I like my book is when Dr. Werner interviews Rosie in the hospital, and he asks very pertinent questions. Why are you not eating? You are not hungry? You don't like the food? Or do you just want people to worry about you? And he said, the latter. That tells you a strategy of a person that needs attention. And then when he continues and he said, why did you love this man so much? I love him until he could give me what I wanted. When he didn't, I stopped loving him. This is a person that cannot love, because love is not taking, love is giving. And she had all this mixed up. And this is the beginning of a self-judgment and unhappiness. These parts I like. To describe that the sea is blue and the moon is shining and the music of Cole Porter is playing night and day, it's okay.
Another question that comes to mind, particularly today when we are presenting the book in English, the Barcelona incident. The question that comes to mind is, do you think that it will make a difference for the reader to read it in English or in Spanish, particularly readers that are bilingual or even readers who are not bilingual? Does it convey any different sense?
I happen to love the English language. It's hard to tell when you hear me speaking it. But I like the precision of the English semantics. You can say very deep things in English with 3 words. In Spanish, you have to use 10 words. And I respect time, and I love to write in English. The trouble is that my English can be easily identified as a non-native English-speaking person. And then I use expressions that are perhaps not 100% correct, or sentences that are too long or too short. But I like the way the English version came out. I'm very happy with it. And there are moments that the English expressions have an impact. When Dr. Werner, who's the most eligible bachelor in Manhattan, is criticized by his secretary by saying, you know, between teaching, doing your clinical work, and doing your research, do not have time for yourself. What happened to your life? You are not getting any younger. Life is business, he says. Life is business. Life is not business. But everybody knows what he meant. To say this in Spanish, life es un negocio,
No, right.
doesn't go. And there are some things. When the army is trying to recruit him for war service, he is a hard sell. He doesn't want to go to the army. And then he opens the window of his office and sees the New Jersey Palisades with the morning light, looks across the Hudson. It's worth fighting for. This indicated that he changed his mind and he's going to say, yes, I want to go. And I don't know, I think it's kind of interesting to write in a different language. But why did you think about this, by the way?
Well,
Now I'm asking you.
I mean, for me, the bilingualism or people who communicate in one or two languages has been an interest for many years. As you know, here in New York City, we have a large population of people who don't speak English or don't speak English well enough. So when they end up in the hospital, particularly in the area of psychiatry, they express their feelings different, whether they're speaking in English, like you say. They don't have the words, so they... And we found that there are times when the clinician, the doctor who listens to them, gets a different view of the patient, whether the patient is speaking their first or second language. Anyway, that is what came to my mind. But I think for readers, I think it's a good question. I happen to be able to read in English and Spanish, and so I read El Intercambio, right? And I found it, again, an extraordinary story, full of passion, intrigue, and love, sex. I mean, and then I read the Barcelona incident, and I have to say that I felt equally moved by the story, which surprised me. I thought that I will find more differences. You get the same intensity as you do in Spanish.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Your question about loving to express myself in Spanish and in English, in great part is due to one of the co-sponsors of this event, which is the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute. I had the pleasure and honor of being its chairman, I think for 12 years. And this coincided with a moment of great activity of the Spanish Institute. And we used to get speakers, guests, friends, students, Spanish sessions, English sessions, Spanish sessions, English sessions. And there was a moment that we never knew what language we were going to speak or write on. And I think that presence of the Spanish Institute, now Queen Sofia, in me, 12 years or more, also marked me. And quite frankly, I love both languages as I love both countries. And I plan no changes. The Barcelona incident, by the way, it was not my idea. This was the title of the file that the commander of the German ship explained why he lost 2 men from his crew. And the file that he sent to the German Foreign Office was entitled Das Barcelona Incident. And I thought was a good thought. And I picked it up. And I must say, if you allow me a commercial, at this moment, the book is 5 weeks old in English, and the initial reaction is quite positive. People are curious. So, anyway, I think that perhaps our listeners are getting tired of us, and we were told that we had some time. I could be with you, Luis, all day long talking about it.
Thank you.
Maybe another time.
Maybe another time. Your next book. Well, let me thank you very much for agreeing to have this conversation, and let me thank El Instituto Cervantes as well as the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute for their hospitality. This again, it's been a pleasure for me, and I am telling anyone who is listening or watching that this is a very, very intense, meaningful story that brings up real feelings, not only in the protagonist of the story, but in the reader. And when I read it, I really felt, in many ways, the same way some of these actors were feeling. So thank you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you to you and to the Cervantes Institute. Thank you very much.